Welcome back to talk more about what we learned from last night's Iowa caucuses. And to get some perspective, let's welcome in Ed Berliner, host of The Hardline.
Ed, thanks for joining us. Okay, we want to get your take on last night and Ted Cruz's victory.
I think the one thing that really speaks to me is the polls, because let's be honest, all we heard about was the polls, how Trump was going to absolutely crush everybody. The polls said there was no doubt. Wait a minute. Let's back up a minute here. The polls, I think, have become to America sort of like a bad set of suspenders. Okay, we need them. We want them to hold up our pants. Our pants don't fit quite right because that's all the information we have. The suspenders make us feel nice and comfortable. Polls tell us who's going to win. Wait a minute, people. Chuck the suspenders, put on a decent fitting pair of pants, get your information out there, do the research and find out exactly what's going to happen here instead of always relying on these numbers and people who quite frankly don't get the real answers all the time. Look, polls are nice. They're wonderful guiding principles, if you will. But so many people miss the fact that the preponderance of people in Iowa are evangelicals. They believe in the evangelical cause. How you could not take that information, and we talked about it on the Hardline quite frequently, how you couldn't take that kind of information, put it to use with Ted Cruz, who is a darling of the evangelicals, and not at least guess that he would get better numbers is absolutely astounding. The polls are going to tell us things maybe sometimes we want to hear, but we've got to spend more time doing the research, learning about the candidates, and finding out exactly who they are before we make these wild assertions.
We mentioned polls, you mentioned surprisers, and the evangelical vote. We also want to talk about Marco Rubio winning such a large portion of that evangelical vote. He did much better than many expected, getting 21% of the evangelical vote. Many predicted that vote was going to be split between Trump and Cruz, but Rubio turned it into a three-way race. Does this bode well for Rubio's future, in your opinion?
Well, it has to, because he is going to be speaking to these people as we head, not for New Hampshire. We need to take New Hampshire a little bit out of the equation here, because that is a very different animal, different type of process. But there's not a lot of evangelical voters who are there. It's very likely that Donald Trump is still going to get a very good push there. But let's not forget Kasich, let's not forget Bush and Christie. But then let's head to South Carolina right now. Marco Rubio is getting some very important pushes in South Carolina right now, some great support. That's going to be a key for him. The question is going to be, does the evangelical vote, and these are the people who've said that we've got to get out in droves this year. We can't do what we did 4 years ago, and they're exactly right about that. Are they going to believe more Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio? Marco Rubio has always been a very religious-speaking individual. He's honest about it. He's very forthright about it. But whom are they going to believe? And I think it's also going to come down to this whole establishment argument right now.
Well, let's talk about that, Ed, because a lot of folks are looking at this in New Hampshire specifically. The Washington Times reports that Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, and John Kasich are, in their words, in an existential death struggle right now. The circular firing squad is what we've often referred to it as. But all these candidates competing essentially for the same voters in New Hampshire, do any of them make it out alive if we're going to continue the plan?
You mean, do you think they will move on to South Carolina if we're talking about them?
Yeah.
I think at least one of them has to go by the time we're done.
One of them has to go on, or one of them is going to be done?
No, one of them has to go. Look, we have to start winnowing the field here sooner or later, because right now when you get through these three, these are key. We've got to get down to the point right now where the Republicans decide whom we want. We can't start having 10, 15, 100 people right now. You look at the top three. I think Christie has a very good chance to move on. I think Kasich's message is being heard quite a lot in New Hampshire right now. I'm still not certain, as many people are, about Jeb Bush. I'm not so sure that he is, and here's that great word we hear, resonating with a lot of the voters at this point. He doesn't seem forceful in many ways. He doesn't seem as if his message is sticking. I think Kasich and Christie's message will. The people that I know in New Hampshire, I lived in New England for a couple of years, several years, and I know some of them, and these are big political types who really love this type of year and this time of year. They like Christie. They like his message at this point, and they're not falling. Many of them are not falling for Donald Trump.
Let me get a threshold from you, either a percentage of the vote or a place in New Hampshire for all three of those guys to continue on. Where do they need to finish?
Well, undoubtedly, they need to finish as high as possible. I mean, John, look, they
right,
have
if they're
to
not
start
going to win,
getting some votes.
does it have to be a second place or third place finish? Will that be enough? Or do they need to get 20% of the vote, even if it's split amongst the three?
They've got to finish up in that top five right now. They've got to at least crack that, because you still have your top three that are going to move on, which is going to be Trump, Cruz, and Rubio. I don't think Dr. Carson has staying power at all from what I've heard in New Hampshire. I think they're going to have to finish in that 4 and 5 slot right now, and then I think it's going to winnow down. It's still comes down to the message, and I think that the message right now, the people that I speak to in New Hampshire, Christie and Kasich are making big moves. They're not falling for Donald Trump right now, the people I've spoken to, and that evangelical vote is going to be lost. Look, it still is South Carolina. We have to get to South Carolina, and that's going to tell a lot about who is going to move forward, and that's going to start that real winnowing of the field.
That it will. Ed Berliner, thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you. And don't forget to watch The Hardline tonight at 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock Eastern Time right here on Newsmax TV. Great to have you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ed.
Coming up next, you've heard the headlines of the day. Now get ready for the punchlines. The best jokes from the late night comedians are up next. Plus, there's still time to weigh in. Last week, we talked to Michael Reagan, the son of President Ronald Reagan. He says his father would be appalled if Trump wins the GOP's nomination. But what do you think? Tweet us at Newsmax Now or leave us a comment on our Facebook page.